she was peeking around the corner. She's gone now.
That's right. All right, so this is gonna be fun, man. I've been looking forward to it, and just sort of we're just gonna shoot the bull, go on. I got a couple of little talking points if we hit a dry spell or whatever, but we're just gonna go right now.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Welcome into the Bite Me podcast special episode today. Been looking forward to it. Talking to Scott before the game. Before the podcast, and I said before the game. You can tell I've been at training camp all week long. But I was like, I'm excited for this one. I always enjoy our discussions with Mark Nichols, founder of DOA Lures, and this is going to be one of those where Caleb and Dean, especially Caleb, would have been happy. I didn't even do a rundown. All those things that they like to ignore, they don't even have to ignore them today because I just want to have a nice long chat, great stories, great background, etc. with Mark Nichols from DOA Lures. Now, first things first, real quick. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, and of course the Bite Me group page. And if you happen to be with us live here on YouTube, we will take your questions. This is going to be a very free-flowing podcast, which kind of makes me nervous. I like to be more prepared, but I'm thinking let's just have a conversation, open a beer, whatever it may be. It's already open. It's already open.
I spent the night here. Live in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
They were leaving the house at 5:15 to go fishing for sailfish.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I wish I should have called them, saw what the report was. Back right now.
All right, so Mark, let's get into it here, and I'm just going to kind of lead the way, and then Scott, I know, has a lot to talk about, stories and such. But DOA, of course, just a monster of a company and a fantastic company as well. I'm going to start with the lures themselves, specifically shrimp. We talk about it a lot on this podcast. DOA Shrimp. Dean said he's made a living with them, and of course, Scott is quite familiar. I'm quite familiar. But that's where it all started. For those who may not know, your background and all your experience and catching fish, etc., just give us the little thumbnail, quick sketch of how this all started.
Dad had a shrimp boat in Galveston Bay, so I saw a lot of shrimp. I tended to eat more shrimp. There's my Sky King and Penny flying over. Excuse me. They're probably both dead of old age too. Anyway. What's that talking about? I actually, a lot of it was kind of a synthesis of a bunch of things, but I was always kind of fascinated about making artificial lures. I played with them for a long time, doing this in my teens. And as time went on and my experience got better and I was around plenty of shrimp, we had to sell half our shrimp live in Galveston Bay, and that was in the 60s. And we had a bait shrimp license. And so So we'd take them in, but we also had a tank where we'd store them till I took them in. And so I watched them dive and swim around a good bit. But I also had gone to Colorado, and I really learned finesse fishing and dropping a fly and watching it drift down in the current. And I really got a feel for currents a lot more. I mean, I loved to canoe and that sort of thing, so I knew currents in that respect. But learning how to fish them effectively, then I moved over here to Florida, and by way of girlfriend, ended up over here. Her parents had a condo, so I ended up over here, and I, started fishing. And one day when I first moved here, I went and bought some live shrimp. Went over to what they call a mosquito bridge over at Jensen Beach Causeway, and threw out a shrimp wanting to catch a nice trout. And first cast, about a 40-pound tarpon comes out of the water, and I realized I wasn't in Missouri no more. Like, holy shit, doo-doo, yeah. Like, wow.
Yeah.
But the diversity of fish here at the time, when I first moved here in the 80s, was amazing. I'm pretty disgusted in the state as far as what they haven't done with their natural resource that they have. That's incredible, that they've just let the chemical industry tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, my phrase these days, like for anybody I talk to, is watch what's upstream.
Yeah.
What they're doing upstream, because you're going to get it. And, it sure destroyed what I thought was one of the best fisheries I'd ever been in. And so now I bring it back to full circle talking about current. I moved here, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with we have 2 high tides, 2 low tides a day. So we got pretty good moving water. So anytime you're fishing around your passes and inlets, you're going to deal with similar stuff. And so at that point, I developed that shrimp because I could let it sweep in a current really well, or I could wade with it and fish it very slow and meticulously without having to work it so fast because it was relatively light. And at the time, I was using relatively light spinning gear. So
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, one of the things people don't get on that shrimp is the way to fish it, being able to just swim it back. A lot of people want to hop it around and make it dance and do all this stuff. And you told me that way back when we first met, that you need to let it just ease along.
Sure. Well, when it gets around down to it, the KISS theory of fishing, where you can say, oh, well, that's a stupid way to fish. But when you look at a couple of the biggest redfish tours, there were one with a stupid popping cork with a plastic shrimp under it. It's ain't rocket science, folks. And it kind of, always use that to try to tell people, look, you made a noise. It drew the fish to the noise. He sees something and you didn't freaking move it so fast, he never had a chance to eat it.
Yeah.
And you're doing the same thing if you're not using it, but you're having to slow-mo down a lot. And secondly, your drop rate is so slow because of the weight being in the center. You think it's already dropped down 4 feet when really it's 2 feet down.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you're starting to work it when it's out of the zone where you really want it to be.
Right.
So just let it go. I mean, that's what a lot of our listeners are going to get out of that. Let me ask you this, just out of curiosity. Are you, I mean, obviously we all know you live this stuff. I mean, you are on the water all the time. Last time I talked to you, after we talked, you said, yeah, I'm going to go out down to the canal or whatever's behind you, the inlet, and see if I can go find something with the snook or whatever. I mean, you are always, on the water, always fishing, always thinking about the next fish. That said, are you a little surprised, like how big and successful this company has become? And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's just blown up.
As far as that goes, when I started the company, I did a couple things. I asked myself, what would I want if I was an employee, because I was an employee a lot more than I was a boss in my life. And so first thing, 4-day weeks, like people got 4 days. And the other is truly give them a bonus if they work hard.
Mm-hmm.
And people appreciate that. And so I went with that basic philosophy, and I love to fish, and I got a good bit of press, as they call it, social media in this world, and I caught a lot of fish. I lived in a great place to catch fish, and I took advantage of it because I love to do it. So I was going to be there anyway. Might as well take somebody with me. But I was really proud of for quite a long time where I brought folks from really good anglers from Texas, really good anglers from Louisiana and other states that had caught, their personal biggest trout. And then I've had people waiting where they hooked a fish and I'm going, you got a big trout, and they're arguing with me because they're swearing it has to be a redfish or a snook. And then you finally, when they were 10 feet from the fish and you hear this holy, what, realize what they're looking at. And unfortunately, because of herbicides and stuff, that's really just done a real number on this fishery. But I mean, I'm a huge believer that nature can come back very quickly if we leave it alone.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some really healthy grass growing recently. I'm starting to catch pinfish and that sort of thing, which means they've got cover, which is really good news. And we're fortunate here that we've got some pretty serious grown-up snook that live here, and we got a good healthy population of some mid-sized snook in the backyard. It's right back over there. That's a nice little creek, and I used to catch probably 10 times more juveniles than I do now.
Mm-hmm.
So water quality has definitely changed. They did what was going to be a great thing, which was they built a little retention pond up above it, but it turns out it's a nice little dog park where they throw their little things out for the retrievers. And so they put herbicide in it. So they kill everything in the pond and it comes in the freaking creek. It's like stupid.
Yeah.
So it has not helped our fishery by them, quote, cleaning it up.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, God, excuse me, but it's a government thing, I guess. At
So
any rate,
you've got grass coming back now? Because when I was there, we didn't see a stitch of grass.
yeah, actually, I've seen some grass that, some of it's single strands, but, it's a foot long. So I'm seeing some, like I say, if we don't get some major league dumps, then we're going to be happy. And, when all this mess started happening, which has been, 10, 12 years, but considering that I was waiting here since 1980, I saw it go down in really, really a hurry.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, we'd be fishing spillways in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s where there'd be foam that'd be 2 feet high and you could smell the fertilizer, but there wasn't any herbicide in it. And the grasses, everything was happy. We were catching fish.
Let me ask you this: the legendary place is Indian River,
Right.
and I'm guessing Indian River is one of the ones that you're talking about. What is the status of that?
Well, that's where I live. And,
Yeah.
I was a real maniac on trying to get a world record on 2 for a while and that sort of thing. But I'd caught so many really beautiful big fish over 30 inches. And, the good news was most people around here, me being raised in Texas eating fried trout, it was like, a way of life. And I still don't argue with it. I still eat some, but when I started catching those really big fish, that's the last thing in your mind is ever killing one of those. And started seeing so many consistent big fish that, my biggest was, 34 and a quarter inches. I had a measuring tape, a Taylor's measuring tape with me. I was like half mile from my boat. I wasn't about to drag it around that far.
Yeah.
Still on it,
Mhm.
but, it was somewhere around 12 pounds or more. I don't know. But it was just big.
12-pound, 34-inch trout. I think most of us would take that, Scott.
Yeah.
Well, that fish was less than a half mile from where the all-tackle world record fish was caught in Florida and Fort Pierce.
Yeah.
So it's a very healthy fishery, and Fort Pierce has a good inlet. Therefore, it's got really good tide flow. It's got some good deep water. Our inlet is not a natural inlet. It always wants to fill up with sand, but it still has a fairly decent tide flow. And there's some very good brackish water, which the brackish water can grow some of the biggest, fattest, heavy girth snook.
Mm-hmm.
I think a fish gets around 40 inches up there and he's laying around a dock and he's eating a 2-pound mullet and he's going to sleep for 2 days and just sitting around belching and farting. We found they don't fight worth a darn, just because they're slobs and they got a bad heart. If they went to the doctor, cholesterol's high, they and then try to make a 175-yard run and they fall over dead. We literally have had them call them heart attack fish twice. Fish, and we tried to eat one. It was the grossest thing we ever tried to eat. All of a sudden, you're thinking of a fish that might be, 18, 19 years old, that's been living up in that brackish water all that time. I don't want that fish. My theory is, eat the bottom side of the slot, and they're the cleanest.
So back on the lure side of things, you did the shrimp. What was the next one? What was your next lure?
The bait buster.
The bait buster? I thought so.
Mm-hmm.
Bait buster came as an evolution because I fished with a buddy of mine all the time, but I fished nights a lot. And I was catching fish, catching snook really well on the shrimp, fishing around structure at night, fishing shadow lines and that sort of thing. And many times, as far as educating goes, it was stalling it at a tide. You could sit there and it'd literally set neutral in a tide, say 2 feet subsurface.
Mm-hmm.
Leave it right on that edge, and the fish just after a few minutes, something's going to eat it. They can't stand it. So
Right.
very successful doing that. And then somebody on one fall day decided it was mullet run time, and they wanting to eat my shrimp for a little bit there. They were wanting to eat mullet, and so literally I went to my shop that night and I carved a really looked like everybody said it was way too phallic to try to sell. I put that and caught a couple of snook the very next night, and so I said, I got something, and it was something that would ultimately hold in a current. And I ended up designing the shallow running bait buster would be virtually identical design as the shrimp. It's got a lead in the belly, therefore it's not going to be a head first drop. It's going to be more of a belly gliding type of drop.
Mm-hmm.
So, I can lift it, make that tail wiggle a little bit, and then let it fall. That bait is, is written in the Wall Street Journal as the ugliest bait the writer had ever seen and the best tarpon and striper bait he'd ever thrown.
Yeah, it can look however it wants.
I wasn't going to argue a bit.
Yeah.
Well, that's my go-to, for my tarpon here on the beachfront. That's pretty much all I throw at them anymore.
So many folks, especially if I get folks from Texas and that sort of thing, and a lot of them here too, if they're used to fishing for trout and that sort of thing, they want to jig things a lot more, and tarpon don't like it jigged. They just, the simpler I keep it, the better it works.
Yeah. Now, when you're designing these things, and you have, is it last I saw 27 different lures, something like that, or maybe more now? I don't know. But do you just sketch it? Is it in your mind? Do you mold it? How do you come about? I heard that the first DOA shrimp was made out of wood.
Oh yeah, a lot of them are made out of wood and epoxy.
Mm-hmm.
Wood, epoxy, metal, whatever it seems to take. It's very interesting. We could talk for all right, this is going to be a 45-hour podcast. It's interesting that I've met a young man that's a super nice young man, and his whole world is he designs 3D printers, so he ain't stupid. And
Yeah.
sharpest little young kid in the world. I really appreciate being around him. And he comes to my back porch over here and looks at something I've been whittling on, and he'll say, how long did it take you to make that? And I'll say, I say I come back and forth working on it, but I've got maybe 4.5, 5 hours. And he'd look at it and go, that's pretty competitive. I couldn't do much better. But then he'd look at another part and I'd say, that one's a pain in the ass. I can do that in an hour. And it's really fascinating, working with the new technology, things that you can do, with the mold, with 3D printers and that sort of thing. And as they come up with different products that they can 3D print with, that's going to be an interesting world.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution of, everything, including fishing, and how they make that sort of stuff.
But a lot of people don't realize, they know you for the shrimp, but I've run into so many people that have no idea you've got paddle tails, you got rat tails, terrorize, and all those.
The terrorize is one of our sleeper best baits I make. And, and it's also interesting that there's certain things that I'll say, let's pick the tough guy. It's an artificial pinfish I make.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody buys them except for the Christmas Island and a couple other islands around the Christmas Islands. And they buy about 20 or 30,000 a year.
that means something.
Why, and you go, okay, WTF, what, why is this happening?
Yeah.
And finally we're asking them, the first day Christmas Island ordered like 5,000, and we're like, what do you do? And they're like, we catch yellowfin tuna with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the shape of a butterfish, and they're fishing big deep buoys and stuff, and they're vertical jigging and catching all these fish with them. Send us pictures of giant yellowfin where they'll nose hook a big circle hook in it and a big weight in front of it and jig this stupid thing. It's just like, okay, I would have never thought of that one, but
yeah.
And honestly, I think that bait is one of my sleeper baits that I haven't fished with enough, because I do believe that I've watched a commercial guy fishing off one of our bridges one night, and I was throwing terrorized, consistently catching snook. And there's a guy on the other side of the bridge who I found out was throwing a tough guy, and his fish were 4 to 6 inches bigger than mine every time. Catching them, and I went over and I was like, "What are you doing?" And aside from poaching, where I watched him throw a few snook in a buddy's truck, I found out that he was throwing the tough guy, and he said it's the perfect shape of a bunker. Fishing around some bridge pilings, and the bunker were piled up in there, and he was crushing them. And he was doing similar things where he was casting it just 3/4 down tide, where it would kind of sweep across the bottom of the lower part of the tide, so it would keep it elevated somewhat. And I watched him catch a couple fish, just boom, boom.
Yeah.
So, that is to say that I am always learning about my baits, really.
Yeah. So what is it terrorized for then? When someone asks you that,
if I've caught gigantic snook on it, I've had within the last, say, 45 days, I've probably had 15 tarpon over 100 pounds eat that bait. I've sight casted them, but I've also, I learned quite a long time ago, 25 years plus, down in the Keys, I can flag that bait in a ripping current, and that bait will sit neutral in that current. And from a fish's point of view, in a 4-knot current, if it's setting neutral, it has to be swimming.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It has to be.
You'll be proud. That's what we were throwing today. And we put 2 tarpon in the air today on it.
Yeah, those tarpon are just cruising back and forth up and down that shadow line, and they come up and see it and just suck it in. And one thing about the bait buster and the terrorized that to me gave them a huge advantage over a lot of other soft plastics is that they're both laying in an empty gap. So you have full gap of the hook on the hook exposure on the strike. It's not buried in a piece of plastic, it's in a hollow place. Both the bait buster is on a hollow with that insert shaped like a baseball bat, and the insert in the terrorized is a piece of 1/4-inch flat stock. It's 16-inch thick that goes right down to that eyeballs. So both of those have complete hook exposure, and so I can hook a really big tarpon, and it just has this perfect little lip hook in it. And I'm hooking them with some 40-pound leader, and honestly, if I'm hooking a fish 80 plus pounds, I'm going to fight him for maybe 20 minutes, and then I'm going to load up on top of the thing and hopefully let that little real small hook rot out of his face, and everybody's going to smile and go away happy.
That's what Scott says all the time too. Just get the eat. Get the eat.
I mean, the thing about it is it's hot as hell, number one, for both of us, the fish and myself. Two, I could get that fish to boat in another 20 minutes. Would have to be how long it take to get that fish the last 20 feet. And you're really wearing on that fish when you start turning them back and forth. That really wears on them hard. And so if you go, it's like a win-win deal to me.
Yeah. One thing that a lot of people may not know, like literally every bait that you've ever made, you don't even start to think about putting it in production until you've used it and you've caught fish with it. I'm curious, like you've had so much success, how does that play out? Has there been any where you think, well, maybe this ain't it, and then all of a sudden you start catching fish and you realize it, or is it you've had to adjust it? How does that play out? Okay. Oops. Yeah. Lost him there. It must be his signal for a second. But we will, this is the live part of the podcast that we're going to edit out. I'm sure he'll join us here again in just a minute, but here he comes right here, I think. I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on that in terms of that he does that. He doesn't even start to think about it.
Oh yeah. He'll be working on baits. I've got some of them in my box right now that are lures he's working on, and he'll send them over to me and say, here, fish this. Tell me what you think. Tell me how it's moving in the water. Is it something that you think will work? He really wants the feedback. He realizes he doesn't know it all. And he's damn good at it, but he wants other people to input and let him know how things are going.
Yeah.
The one I'm working with him on right now is a crab, and I really hope we get him back because I want to ask him some more questions
Oh, I
about that.
got
There he is. All right.
He's
So we were talking about like how I guess it would be research and development. Like you don't even start to think about putting it into production until you know it's going to catch fish. But have there ever been anywhere you're like, I don't know, and then all of a sudden you realize a little tweak or something gets it done?
you know, our stupid PT, the poodle turd, that I can't. Yeah, I can throw it a mile, then I can do what I wanted to do. But I started it a long, long time ago, and I get pissed off and walk away from it. Then you be working on something else, and you say, you know, I could apply that to that, and it kept getting shorter because of hookup percentage.
Yeah.
You know, I can get a little longer walk with it if I made it longer, but then all of a sudden my hookup percentage really goes down big time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like using that bait. You know, if I'm down in your neck of the woods and it's blowing and there's loose floating grass everywhere, I can still fish it very effectively. My biggest bass I've caught to date was throwing it right in the middle of lily pads. And I waded out there and grabbed the darn thing. I saw it eat.
Well, I gotta tell you, you know, I had heard of it, but it wasn't until I was fishing with Scott a little over a year ago, I guess now. You know, he had that and he threw it, and you know, he caught at least one, maybe a couple of redfish, whatever it was, and I'm like, let me see that thing, let me see that. And now that I'm down in Aransas, all the grass, what you're talking about,
Right.
I mean, it's almost. I use either that or another little top water, but it's almost exclusive when there's grass. It's a hell of a bait.
They cast a country mile too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Long ways. I tell people, you know, I've got a lot of friends that are fishing structure or fishing a bank or fishing under docks with it. And I always tell them, throw it offshore first and see how far it goes before you throw it 20 feet into those mangroves right over there.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many customers I've had, you know, tie that on, and their first cast is 30 yards into the grass. I mean, it's way back there.
Definitely just goes and goes and goes.
Well, the good news is it comes back out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I've got it out of amazing things before.
Well, you know, at that feeding frenzy, the event we're having, Scott and Dean and Caleb are going to have a casting contest to help raise money for the charity we're working on. They're going to be throwing the PT7 because for that exact reason.
That'll be a good one. You can keep it pretty easy too. Give them some room though.
And it won't take anyone's eye out because the hook is embedded there.
Sure, it's probably better than, definitely better than shrevels. That's for sure.
Scott, I know you wanted to ask. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, I am glad that, you know, pretty much everything I've got, with the exception of one bait, it's got a single hook upright, and lets me touch the bottom without snagging the bottom. Lets me hook fish clean without you or the fish getting extra holes in it. And you know, to me, it's just an easy way to fish, and a clean and simple, and you still get excellent hookup percentage.
Scott, I know you wanted to ask about some of the new stuff, including the crab.
Yeah. Are you still working on your crab?
Yeah, it looks pretty good, but I've also got there's I think I told you about a fly that I've got a modified circle hook that goes in it, and it throws really good and it catches fish on fly. But I've also caught some really good panfish, i.e. crappie, with it. It's at a mold builders as we speak, as well as guys that build our molds in Alabama. And the other bait is I've got a 6.5 swim bait, and
Really?
I'm going to have a couple custom hooks made, jig head style of hooks.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just interested in doing some stuff like that. I've made a couple of parts, and it gets back to your question earlier. Wasn't satisfied getting great strikes, but the hookup percentage sucks because the lead came up is interfering too much with the strike.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I've got some longer shank hooks with deeper gaps to help compensate for that. So I'm working on, that's one of the projects I'm working on.
Man, the science and the experience here is what's fascinating to me, because if you weren't such a good fisherman, you wouldn't make as good a lure, and then you make a good lure and you become a better fisherman. So it's like, you got to, it all goes together.
It's so never ending. I love throwing my about 3/4 of my snake at a tailing redfish.
Mm-hmm.
You drive them in with it, and you can wiggle it at 2 inches, and it wiggles like crazy.
Yeah.
So it's not something you have to move fast. So you can do a really subtle presentation, and get it right in their face where they like to eat, and wiggle it a little bit. And I never designed it for that either. I had guys in the Carolinas with the first time I ever actually exposed it. And this is in the wintertime, and I thought they were going to buy it for largemouth bass. And so I go there, and people start buying it, and all these guys were like, all of our redfish have green worms in their belly right now. And they did, and we used it. I'll be darned if they didn't crunch it, where we were shads and jerk baits and eating it, but half-ass compared to the snake. And we're doing it with a little weighted screw lock, so we're fishing it really weedless. We're throwing it over some oysters and stuff like that, and it was deadly. And so it gave me some confidence. So since then, Ed Zayak that was with us, he sat there and had tried a bunch of stuff up in the Panhandle. He said, well, I'm going to try this. And sure enough, that they crushed it. And I didn't think ever, trout would be eating it, but I've caught some really nice trout with it too. So
the first time you brought it down here was when we were doing one of the media events in South Padre, and me and Lee Alvarez took it out there. I said, I'm just going to try it out. And we were up there fishing near some docks and some bulkheads. And it was after that time. It was that time when it snowed in South Padre on us. And I was throwing it up against that bulkhead and banging it into it and letting it fall. And we were catching trout literally every cast. And you kind of cut out when you said it's the snake oil. Right? That's the name of it, isn't it? Snake oil. And it looks like a deadgum. It was meant to look like a little snake to fish for bass, but it looks like a worm in saltwater. It looks like a little eel or something.
We got guys that are fishing it for cobia, and they're dropping it down with heavy leads, and some of them are putting like 3 on one hook.
Really?
It looks like an octopus. I mean, it's going everywhere on it. It's pretty cool looking. I dropped one at a pool that way, and it is alive. Like that. It's kind of cool.
You mentioned the pool. We've mentioned it on the podcast as well. You really want to know how a bait works, do that. And, that's one for sure with me. All right. So let's get into a little bit of story time here because I know it might embarrass you a little bit, but you're a legendary fisherman. All these more than 100 trout over 30 inches. And
I'm ready. I got a great one for you.
All right. Let's not bury the lead. Hit it.
We can call this segment I Knew That.
Okay.
So
done.
One of my funniest stories was I knew an outdoor artist, Bill Elliott, and I knew him for a long time, and he was calling me because he knew I caught a lot of big trout, and so he was like, Mark, I've caught 30-pound snook on fly, I've caught 100-pound tarpon on fly, I've caught giant redfish on fly, I've never caught a big trout on fly. Mm-hmm. And he like, I was like, Bill, I'm not on like big trout right now. And a lot of that sometimes was my guilt was that I wasn't fishing for big trout because I was having fun fishing for tarpon at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of blowing them off. And finally, like, I'm going, Bill, I'm on a great tarpon buddy. And we went to this place called Five Fingers. We saved half a dozen tarpon roll. He makes a perfect cast into them, instantly hooks up, sets it good, starts fighting the fish, keeps fighting it. It's not coming up. Within about 2 minutes, the fish comes up, and it's a 31-inch trout. You effer, you knew it was here. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I knew that.
If you fished on the water enough, you've had people go, you knew that, and you go, yeah, I did, yeah.
Yeah, hey, just take the compliment. You're the expert.
Yeah. not at all where I fish for them at all. So it's like nothing was right about it. But that's the cool thing, That's what keeps it coming back. And these days, watching somebody else catch a big fish for me is the best. I had a buddy of mine. I don't know if I was telling you, Scott, but came down from North Carolina. We took several tarpon, and had some good jumps and had a great time. And we were coming back to the ramp, and I was like, there's a place where I've caught trout, and I've been kind of watching them grow a couple inches a year for the last 3 years. And so I wanted to go catch some. And so he brought out his rod from North Carolina, 10-pound braid and 16-pound leader. So we go over by a dock, and he throws one of our 4-inch Cal jerk baits, golden brim. It's a really good color. And he twisted it a couple times, hooks a fish. Fish takes off. I'm like, you just hooked a big snook. And it swims around a piling, and it's taking a lot of line, and it's still going. And I'm like, don't pull hard. We'll go around the piling and see where it's at. Well, as I'm around the piling, I see that he's already at the dock 75 yards away, wrapping around the dock up there, splashing around. I'm going, oh, great, this ain't gonna happen. But so as we come around the first piling, his line is still going to the piling. We can't quite figure it out, so he pulls hard, and it must have been on a splinter on the piling. So it comes total slack. So he's pissed because he's lost the fish. So he's cranking fast before he realizes he's still on the fish, but he just had a whole lot of slack line when it came off of the splinter. So now he starts gaining line, and the stupid fish swam back out from the structure and came swimming at us. And he landed a 41.5-inch snook on 10-pound braid and 16-pound leader, where it swam around 2 sets of docks. And, it's the most beautiful fish in the world. I was like, holy cow. You don't know. But it's it's pretty cool. And, it's also cool that I've been fortunate enough to be around here when we could hook a lot of snook. Yeah. And we could go out at night, and we could hook a lot of 10-pound plus fish. And
now, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, because you got to be thinking, people ask me occasionally this, because I the business that I'm in, they always ask me, like, who are some celebrities that you've fished with? And, I'll mention a name or two, and can they fish? What was it like? Any stories? Now, you have been on a lot of TV shows, a lot of celebrities, stuff like that. What can you share with that maybe won't embarrass them too much, but maybe embarrass them a little bit?
Well, there's some that I just can't say because it would be bad. I remember when there were a whole lot of outdoor writers writing stories, and I remember taking more than one outdoor writer where, after reading the story, I was like, was I on that trip? I did what with what, and thinking what? No, not at all. But you kind of grin and bear it sometimes, and sometimes the bull just gets so it's just, I don't know. But I've had really funny experiences. I took a guy fishing one time, and he jumped off the boat, and for some reason he slipped, and he filled up his waders. And the nicest gentleman in the world, his name was Joe, Cowboy Joe, we called him. And Joe was probably 78, and he was the youngest of 3 brothers, so he had to do all the work at the deer camp, set it up. I was like, and he walked with a limp like he'd been fallen off a horse a few times. But he hops out, he floods his waders, he gets back in the boat. I said, drop your waders off and, pour them out. He laid on his back and lifted his legs straight up. And his comes running out all over him. I was like, well, that's really not the way I was thinking, but it did the job. So
it did the job.
But, yeah, I don't know. I've had a lot of, good, funny experiences. I hooked, I don't ever do bait and switches. With the only exception, I've done a couple of bait and switches where I hooked a fish and where they stuck a fly in the fish's mouth.
Oh.
So didn't feel too bad about that. And both times it was big jacks, like 15+ pound jacks. And one of them, I stuck the hook in its mouth, let go, and the fish, I had beat it on a 30-pound braid, 60-pound leader, and I didn't give it a prayer. I kicked its ass immediately, got it up to the boat, pulled that lure out, put the hook in its mouth. Fish took off. The TV show host is looking, saying, "That's a big, you know what?"
Yeah.
And the rod launches out of his hand as it takes off. The wilderness out there, and I cast over the rod, snag the rod, bring the rod back, and he lands the fish. And I'm going, this is going to be the greatest TV in the world. That's fun shit, you know. And he's like, "Oh, I wouldn't do that because it would make me look bad." I'm like, "Are you
Oh,
serious?"
come on. Come on.
And I was like, "You missed the best part. This is the real world, dude." I couldn't believe it. It's just bizarre. You know,
We've all thrown at rods. We've all thrown at rods that we've dropped in the water.
We've all done all sorts of stuff that, you know, sometimes, I mean, I'm not too proud to admit it because I hopefully didn't do it 6 times. But that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Me and Mark fishing over there the last time I was there. We got back to the house. He realized he had left his shoes at the dock. And they were his old fishing shoes, his favorite old fishing shoes. And he was all, "Oh man, I can't believe I left them over there. They're going to be gone. They're gone." And me and him, we had a few drinks, so we didn't want to drive back to the dock. And then I left. And he let me know a few days later that he had gone back over to the dock and they were still sitting there. Even the homeless guy wouldn't take them.
Yeah. It's nice. Yeah, people have mentioned my smell before, but you know, they tell me to put my shoes outside, maybe more than once.
There's a homeless guy that stays there all the time, and that guy wouldn't even take them. It was.
I know. I was surprised they didn't look that bad. I didn't know.
Hey, so what about because you know our listeners, I'm always trying to think for them and what they're thinking. Man, they must be going, all right, so what is the biggest trout you told us? You know, some of these other memorable fish that to this day, as many as you've caught, whether it's one that maybe you lost and caught again, or you saw and you kept going back and stalking, like what are the most memorable fish that to this day stand out to you?
It's in some cases it's situations. In one situation specifically, talking about trout, I was waiting. One of the bars that I talked about, I was trying to get a 2-pound record, but I was with my brother one time, and I love my brother. He's the goofiest fisherman in the world, but he's a good guy. And so we were out waiting, and it was one of those evenings where, you know, you're on a pretty light sand bottom. We're very fortunate here where we had a lot of good firm bottom. And, you know, I'm standing in probably calf deep water, and I mean, barely a foot deep. And I'm standing there, and all the cars are driving. They all got their headlights on. It's getting pretty dark, but you know, when your eyes adjust like that, it's pretty. You can still see pretty well. Mm-hmm. And a row of 5 trout swam by me. All of them were over 30-inch fish. And just before that, a pot of little finger mullet had gone by me, and they were all milling around just about 20 feet away from me. And when those trout went over there, they instantly boxed them into a really tight group. And I had a bait buster on, but I didn't cast for at least 10 minutes, and I just watched them. And it was way too shallow for them to do a topwater strike, but they would rush the baits, and they would take turns rushing the baits. You see the baits come up and get nervous on the surface and go back down. And I've seen that where trout will do that on them, and flounder will do that on them too, pretty regular too. But you know, I watched them do that several times before I finally had to make a cast. But that night, you know, as I'm getting ready to make a cast, my brother calls me, and he had a 32-inch fish. And so, you know, there were big fish, you know, and it was the right time. And when you're in the right time, the right place, it's really, really cool. And it's really, really cool to watch fish that are literally swimming by you 3 feet away. And you're watching them go in that single file right by you, and you're not moving, just like in a blind or whatever. It was dark enough where if you didn't move, they didn't know you were there.
Yeah.
And that was really cool. I guess I got 3 stories.
Okay.
Second, I'm with the family, and we're out there, and the water's still pretty chilly, and they're wanting to go snorkeling around, and I don't even have a rod with me, and I go for a walk and start looking on the flats to see if I can see some fish. And I start walking, and I see a snook that's, in the mid 40s, and it's laying in a nice sand hole. And so I don't have a rod with me. Since I don't have a rod with me, I'm just going to sneak up on it. And I literally did, because I didn't have a rod, never blew it with a cast.
Yeah.
And I literally was on my hands and knees, because the fish was in at the most 18 inches, not even. And it was laying in this pothole, and I got real low, and I started crawling. And at that point, I was probably 10 feet from the fish. She was looking the opposite way, and the tide had switched. And when I kicked up the sand from crawling, she turned 180 degrees. And without me moving, she swam up to me where I could touch her.
Oh, wow.
Scales on her body. And I wasn't moving. And I was wearing a white T-shirt, but I just wasn't, I was total there, and she didn't, I didn't blow it. And it was freaking awesome to watch that come right up on me like that. And okay, I got 4 stories. Another one just like that.
Let's go. Let's go.
We were filming a little TV show for a local show over on the west coast of Florida, and I'm waiting, and again, it's really nice, beautiful water. There's nice grass. I see a snook cruising, like a 10-pound fish. It's beautiful. I make a cast, and the fish turns on me and starts coming right at me. It's like 20 feet away, and by the time I gain my line, it's maybe 10 feet. And I flip a cast like 12 feet and bring it diagonally across its face, and the lure lands on my shoe, and the fish eats it off my shoe.
Get out of here.
Wow. Picked up on that lure coming across its eye is just the luckiest time in the world, because it followed that lure all the way down and sucked it in. And I didn't get a good hook set, like pulling straight up like that. I hooked it, it took off and made a turn, and it spit. And I was like, I called the camera guy. I go, I got a fish. He's coming up on me. Here he comes. And he got the hook set, but damn fish got away.
Off your shoe.
It was really cool. Okay, and here's to me one of the best.
Okay.
I'm wade fishing, and I just make a pinch weight, and we had a really good pompano bite, and we make colored pinch weights, and I can just pinch it right on my shrimp hook, and I had a red one on my shrimp hook, and I'd seen some tarpon, but I couldn't reach them, and I was walking back to where I parked, and a tarpon rolls literally 30 inches in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I open my bail, and as the little pinch weight is dropping, before I feel the fish eat it, I feel the wake of the fish turning across my legs, because I was wearing shorts. Mm-hmm. And I felt this wake, and then I felt the thump, and then the fish jumped straight up, and he threw the thing right over my shoulder. I can still get goosebumps, because it was like, literally feeling that wake before I felt the fish eat can't even describe it. It was really
something that just struck me on this. You just told your 4 favorite stories, and not one of them where you landed a fish. That's what's so cool about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've caught great fish, but those that haunt you sometimes were just so special,
Yep.
I'm trying to figure out which story I like best. Those are badass. Those are all great.
It's just so lucky, to be out there, and you don't see it by being at home.
No,
you tried for a long time to do that 2-pound record. I know you were. I talked to you off and on when you were doing it. What was the biggest one you got on 2-pound line?
I got like 8 over 9.5, and I got one that was, I swear, dead on 10 pounds. The world record was 10.2.
Mm.
And I swear I probably hooked. I would bet that I had probably 2 or 3 other fish that would have broke it, but I was trying to be some dumbass purist and use a short leader instead of getting a 15-foot leader where I could have put a wrap on my spool.
Yeah.
And, most all those fish were lost when they're right there, because when they're 30 feet away, you got so much stretch in that too that you can get away with, basically you just kind of finger the spool,
Yeah.
tension on it. So, I got pretty good at getting them, but when they were in super tight, then it was, got really pretty special. But I also used a dish rag. I shoved it in their mouth, and they'd snag their teeth really well. And then I could land by lipping them without having to reach in their gills or grab their body.
Yeah.
Since
Well,
I was always in the water anyway, so my fish were never stressed when they were leaving. A lot of them had them on too. It was more like you were doing sin, trying to talk them into you, Right. And
man.
oh, that brings me to another story. This is important.
Okay.
If
All
if
you
you're
want, baby. All you want.
there's well, I've had some really good friends. My coworker Roy I was fishing with recently, and we were fishing, and he's a good angler. We were fishing around some structure. He hooked a big snook, and he was fighting and fighting. The snook took him under a piling, under a dock, and actually under two floating docks. And he's trying to play tug of war with that fish, and it will not work. You ain't gonna get that fish back because he's got too much stuff in between him and you. If you open your bail and he feels no resistance, about 80% of the time he swims exactly the way he swam away. And he feels no resistance, therefore he's not pulling hard, therefore you're not having any resistance against a barnacle or anything like that. And you gain your line, and a lot of times he swims right out exactly where he ate. He can load up on them again. And I know this because I've lost a shitload of fish, and to a point in time, that didn't work. Let me try something else. And we learned, where we'd have fish that is going to wrap you around a piling. You open your bail, and he relaxes. If he doesn't feel any resistance, he doesn't have a reason to pull.
Yeah.
He swims back, gets in line to start to eat again. And then you ready and pull. We used to get together where you'd have the guy hit the trolling motor and you'd walk to the bow of the boat from the back of the boat at the same time and get him where he would not have a chance to rotate his head sideways.
Yeah. Well, there's a lesson there, man.
Yeah, that's, this is important stuff. I hope everybody's taking notes. With these tarpon fishing, they reopened the nuclear power plant, 11. And those tarpon have been in this place because it's 40 feet deep, and they've got a nice thermocline. There's all kinds of bait in there, and they get real happy. And we've learned that at times you're seeing rolling fish almost all the time there.
Yeah.
And there's days when you can throw at them, and short of a hand grenade, you ain't even going to get their attention.
Yeah.
We'll change colors, and I have learned that sometimes I'll go to a color I hate, like a chartreuse or a pink, and they'll eat the darn thing, but generally we're fishing more some of the darker colors. But if I can't get them to eat there, I'm marking them at 30 feet. They're usually 10 feet off the bottom or somewhere around the 20-foot range. If I can drop that bait straight down and not move it, they will eat it. And we days where we'll hook a half a dozen fish by ideally like just a slight breeze, so they just slowly push you across.
Yeah.
Get it setting at a depth, and first we prefer to throw at them, but if they're not eating, we've got something just sitting there.
Yeah.
And I think when I was talking to Scott one day, I literally took a 1/4 ounce terrorize, and then I took one of our floats and I carved it until I got it where it's just subsurface, so it won't go up and down with the ripple in the water. So that when it's floating, it stays straight, not bouncing up and down.
Damn. I told you this was going to be good. I told you this was going to be good, people. Man, we could do this all day. I do have one more question for you because it's one that we've been getting for as long as we've been doing this podcast. How often do you change your lure? How often do you change your plastic? How often this? How often that? Well, let's ask the guy who designs them and is out on the water every day. How often do you change your lures? What goes into that?
Usually it's because I'm getting humbled by somebody who's throwing something I would never throw. a lot of people are getting stuck on something and not changing as much as I should.
Yeah.
And then get slapped in the face by somebody tying something else on and instantly catch a fish. So I definitely believe that there can be a good bit to do with colors. I will always argue that skill is going to outfish unskill, whether they don't have the quote right color or not. But there are times when fish are suicidal over certain colors.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I, when I was out the other day, my buddy that lost that fish I was talking about, I had another friend of mine that does our IT work brought his son out. Son's an excellent angler. His son hooked a big snook. His son was throwing a pearl terrorized with a green back. Very natural looking color. I hadn't been throwing them. I've been throwing, darker colors.
Yeah.
And he got broke off by 2 big fish. And he also made the same mistake, and I scolded him too. You can't pull. Felt that fish go right under a piece of steel. Don't pull anymore. You ain't gonna win.
Yeah.
It happened. But I'm also gonna, I've got some friends. My Okeechobee buddies. They don't use leader. They'll tie directly braid right to the lure. And I think sometimes the smaller diameter of the braid, especially in the dark, might create less awareness by a fish as opposed to a larger diameter leader cutting through the water.
Yeah. No, Scott and I have talked about that as well. I go back and forth. It depends on what I'm throwing. I'll tie it straight to the line, man.
And the braid is certainly so much more flexible. Your lure is going to act differently if it's tied directly onto the braid versus a heavier leader. And that also depends whether you're using a hook knot or not.
Scott, you have anything before we let him go? By the way, a little programming note here. Those 2 interviews that we were going to do? We ain't going to do them this week. We'll push them back to next week because this has been too good. This has been too good talking with Mark on all this stuff. So those 2 interviews will be next week.
I'm just kidding.
Just getting started. Well, that means you got to come back. That means you got to come back.
Out there.
Go get another beer.
Yeah.
We've been talking about my baby tarpon on the rocks for the last 3 or 4 years. You need to get down here to show me how to catch these things because they are whipping my butt. I mean, we hooked 3 today, but we jumped 2 and
you're 800 times.
I mean, oh yeah, every bit of it. We were throwing at them for a solid 5 hours today, 6 hours. And there was not a period throughout that entire time that they weren't rolling. I mean, they were up on top, 15 to 20 foot of water right on the rocks. I'm sitting out about 30 feet deep and I'm marking bait all over the place, but it's this tiny, tiny little bitty bait. And so I've been throwing the holographic, clear holographic, thinking maybe I can imitate a bait school. One of the guys today said, how about that purple one there? Well, why don't I throw that purple one? He put the purple one on and he jumped a fish within 5 casts. Of course, then we threw that purple one the rest of the day and didn't get another hit on it.
Yeah. I think, I don't think it hurts to change colors.
Yeah.
I really don't. And sometimes I almost would go, sometimes I think about just putting a little stainless clip and just start switching.
Yeah.
I just want to get you down here and show you these fish and get your opinion on how to catch them. Because I've tried all kind of stuff.
Yeah, you've piqued my curiosity way back already. I got to get over there and do it. I'll look at my calendar real hard. I've got a couple things coming up, but nothing real major. I might have to slip over there for a week. You got a place where I can put up my 1-man tent?
Yeah. I got 80 acres, man. It's full of mosquitoes, but
well, I was going to stay close to one of the windows, put a little vent where I could get a little air in.
We got a guest room at this new house, so you're good.
Yeah.
That sounds good to me. I'll take that.
And appreciate you being part of the Bite Me Feeding Frenzy as well. You've talked about wanting to be involved in that. That's coming up in September 21st. I don't know if that's tarpon season anymore, but we'll figure something out.
Are those tarpon going to be in your neck of the woods then?
Should be.
All right. Well, see, I could come early, and speak firsthand.
There we go.
Works for me.
All right. So Mark, this is the part of, I want you to hang around for this because I want you to grade Scott. This is the part of the podcast at the very end where we say, what would Scott do? What would Caleb do? What would Dean do with everything happening up and down the Gulf Coast here? And they give some tips. So, the weather is this, the tide is that. So you're going to be the I guess the grading judge here, Scott. Looking at the weather actually doesn't look too bad from what I was looking at earlier up and down the Gulf Coast. Dean and Caleb are going to be joining us back again next week. So what would you tell our listeners as far as this weekend, Scott?
This weekend looks really good. I mean, there's light winds starting Friday. Right now, they keep saying we got southeast winds. It is southwest. It is dead southwest. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. But it's southwest 15 to 20, so it's kind of muddying up the surf. Surf fishing is not going to work for you this weekend, probably because it's still probably going to hold that sand for a little bit. But come Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's all light southeast. And by Sunday, maybe you can get into the surf. I don't know. I'm going to try the tarpon again. I think tomorrow we're going to do redfish, poling, up shallow. I've had plenty of reports. This past week, it was all that rain, so I'm not really sure exactly what they're doing because I hadn't been able to get out there. It was too much lightning. But I expect them to be right back there where me and Caleb found them the week before all that rain started. So lots of reds up shallow, schooled up. Hearing some decent reports on the trout on drop-offs. Water cooled down a little bit with all that rain and cloud cover. So they might slip up a little bit shallower up on the grass flats. The tarpon, I played with them, like I said, all day today, the little juveniles, but hopefully by Saturday, Sunday, it's going to be calm enough that I can get out on the beachfront and go hunt for the big ones. They're out there. We just hadn't been able to get to them. So I'll be throwing me some DOA bait busters at those big ones. And we're throwing terrorize along the rocks. And that's been the ones that we have been able to hook. It's been on terrorize. So
how do you do, Mark?
He did pretty fair and middling. It was a whole lot less BS than, as I was talking about some of the other riders. That was pretty solid. I couldn't really.
That's right. No BS here.
Yeah.
All right, boys.
I signed on to this thing at 3:28. I made it in the door and signed on. I was at the jetties at 2:30.
That's why I love you, man.
All right, man. Well, this has been the special sort of Bite Me podcast. Mark, we are going to have you on again. Looking forward to seeing you. You're already getting invites on the live YouTube stream to come down and fish with people. So it's going to be taken care of for sure. As I always say at the end, hang in there, Mark. We're going to talk to you after we sign off. But make sure everybody has a very good, safe weekend. I will be back out on the water for sure. Be heading down south ASAP. You guys don't forget, we're going to have a couple of good interviews that are already recorded next week that we put on the shelf because Mark was so good. Next week, along with Dean joining us again, Caleb joining us again, and all your topics and questions. Don't forget to hit us up via the Bite Me Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe on the Bite Me podcast, where it's Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, you guys catch them up, enjoy, and we will talk to you next time.
Didn't even have to bleep him.
I did pretty good.